Welcome to the Jobs and Work podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kendra Jason. I'm a sociologist and workplace equity consultant, and I will bring guests onto the show who reflect the diversity of the American workforce. On this podcast, I challenge you to think about work. Why? Because in America, we spend more time at our jobs than anywhere else. But how often do we really talk about work? And I mean all types of work: women's work, essential work, retirement, being your own boss, how to handle your boss, and so much more. Please subscribe and share the Jobs and Work with Work for Change podcast. You can learn more about my consultancy that supports this podcast at work4changellc.com. Hello, and welcome to episode 44 of the Jobs and Work with Work for Change podcast. I am your host, Kendra Jason, and I'm joined by co-host Chris Maycumber.
Hello, glad to be back.
All right, so today we have a really fun topic. We really want to question you on, should your side hustle become your career? I'll tell you, I was inspired by this topic from a lot of different directions, okay? So all of you know, or most of you know, that Chris and I are college professors. And we also do consulting with Work for Change. Work for Change is a workplace equity consultancy that I started back in 2021. And it is what some people would call a side hustle, right? And I put side hustle in quotes because I don't think of my job as the founder of a consultancy as a side hustle. I think of it as owning my own business or another job. So one of the things that me and Chris are going to talk about is this language and how we think about our side jobs, our side hustles, our second job, our part-time job, and really pushing you to consider if something that may be what some people term a passion project or a side hustle or something that you really care about, if it should replace your traditional, if you will, 9-to-5 job. Okay. So another reason I was inspired by this topic this week is because a article came out from the American Sociological Association in it's a platform, a media platform called Footnotes. And Diego de los Rios wrote an article that's titled, "Why Sociologists Should Consider DEI as a Career." So the link is below and you can read that article on your own. But of course, what Diego talks about is how sociologists have a lot to offer with a sociological perspective in helping understand what is going on when it comes to equity and inequality and social justice in general, okay? And so while I'm on this topic right now of people actually doing the work, I want to bring up a quick shout out to sociologist Rayshawn Ray. I'm wearing his merchandise. This is from let me get the right name here, the Sociologist Ray collection. The link is also below for you to get this shirt. So this shirt says racial equity broker, and that's what I consider myself as. So I follow the footsteps of sociologists like Dr. Rayshawn Ray from the Brookings Institute, who you see all across CNN and other media outlets, really, feet on the ground, an intellectual thought leader, helping us really think about how to make sense of what's going on in our society so that we can make the world a better place. Now, Work for Change, our focus is on the workplace, making the workplace a better place so that you can have a better life in general. So I want to pause here because I want to let Chris tell her story and how she thinks about a side job or a job that's not the mainstream becoming a career.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Kendra. Yeah, I love this topic. I think it's always a good time for sociologists to be pushing into spaces that we're not traditionally in, right? Including workplaces and things like that. We have been, associated with more like academic research and, institutions. But I think no better time than now, because we are in this sort of social moment where there's so much change and so many reasons to pause and ask about work, ask about family, ask about policy, ask about our professional identities, the relationship of work in our lives. And I think COVID did kind of create that sort of like pause moment we know about the Great Resignation and all of these other trends that have emerged out of COVID. So yeah, I really enjoy thinking about work and its relationship in our lives, and I love language. Kendra knows
Yeah.
this about me. I'm a word person, so is she, and we always talk about this. How we make meaning out of words, and the words we use reflect a lot about who we are as a culture. It reflects a lot about our history, and words like side hustle. How does that serve to sort of maybe delegitimate the work we're doing, or minimize it? Or
Mm-hmm.
construct it as, with some kind of meaning, right? We could interpret that a lot of different ways. And, I'll just say, when I decided to get my PhD in sociology, I knew I wanted to teach at the college level, and I wanted to be a researcher. I knew I wanted to be a lifelong student, which is really what a professor is. But I also always felt like sociologists needed to be at the table of public conversations,
Yeah.
asking the big questions, guiding public discourse. And that's what we get to do as DEI consultants, right? We get to take our skills. I think about skills that sociologists have: research skills, analytic skills, problem
Mm-hmm.
solving skills, right? Being able to think through complex problems and identify the little pieces that make up those complex problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Seeing the looks on our clients' faces when we just ask a question about accountability, or how do you implement sustainable concrete strategies that you can do every day. Just asking the question sometimes is a way to really integrate sociology into the work they do. So I love, I say all that to say that I think that as sociologists, this is sort of a call to action. I agree with the invitation that was made in the footnote, that the sociologists should be thinking about how to use their skills, how to use our skills in ways that can have more applied, concrete change.
Yeah, so one thing that Chris talks about language. One thing that has been at my table over the last couple of weeks as I'm thinking about my business in different ways is, people in conversation have called it a side hustle, even in the business, thinking about passion projects and things of that nature, and really trying to help me, think about, like, what is your real focus versus what is a passion project, right? Or what is your real job versus what your side hustle is, right? And so these are all big questions that we all, like visionary people, or people, if you're thinking about your own business, you struggle with how much energy should you put into your traditional 9 to 5 versus, this other thing that you really want to do. And so I will honestly say that anytime someone calls work for change a side hustle, I like cringe because this is not side hustle work, right? And I say that not necessarily for the hours that I put into to work for change, because honestly, it's really not as many hours as many people would think. It's not a side hustle, because the way that I think about side hustles is like it's something I'm just kind of doing on the side to get extra income. It's not in competition with my career or the job that I'm in right now. But in actuality, work for change or my own business is a full business. It is a full fruition of who I am in a different lane than my academic job. And it holds just as much legitimacy and value, and takes just as much energy from me as that academic job, right? And so this is where, I think people come to a crossroads where you say, well, I really get a lot of fulfillment out of the other job that I'm doing. I'm working less hours. I'm kind of having this struggle with, how much time should I put in one or the other? And so there's a question of, when should you, or if you, but the real question, I think, is when should you, transition your second job, which is your thing, the thing that you're passionate about, the thing that you invest in, the thing that's more you than anything else that you do, and replace or greatly minimize your traditional job, which basically you work not just because you not necessarily say you don't enjoy the work, but you're really doing it out of just a traditional norm of working that job and getting that income and getting healthcare, which is really important. Believe me, I understand that, right? However, the way that we think about things, if we just think about it as a side hustle or a passion project, then we're not really investing the mental energy and legitimizing that thing as something that could really be what is the word, representative, more representative of who we are, and actually not just meet the income that you made in your main job, but surpass it while you're doing the good work you really want to do, and not just doing the work that your degree says you should do. And so really, Chris, what I want to say before I turn it over to you is that it leads me into the next question that I've really been pushing over the last few months, which is why we, and this is especially academics, especially people with higher degrees, which is kind of the opposite way of thinking. I think the more you invest in your degree, the more some people feel like they are tethered to the university, or tethered to a bank, or tethered to a pharmaceutical company, tethered to something that gives them, what society says they should get for having an advanced degree in this industry, a good job, right? And there's a lane for that, and that's great. I'm in it myself. I love that lane, but what I really want to push people on, especially the amount of debt that so many people, especially women and people of color, go into to get advanced degrees, is the fear to monetize your degree beyond or outside of the academy, or outside of the bank, or outside of that pharmaceutical company, and become an independent consultant, such as what Diego de los Rios mentioned in the ASA article. Yes, Chris.
No, I think we have this knee-jerk reaction that if we're monetizing something, particularly in sociology, where people are very critical of capitalism and taxation, and critical of the system of rewards, right? So I think we also need to recognize that monetizing our skills is something that is actually in service of a lot of social good. Working with clients and getting paid for that, I don't see the problem in getting paid to help companies and businesses make the work they do better, when they're coming to us saying, please help us make our work better. We know we need to improve it, but we just don't know how. Right. So we assess what their needs are and figure out how to give them the tools to do that. So monetizing our skills, right? And you're right, in academia, it's so much tethered to that degree. And we also don't, in graduate school, get that professional socialization outside of academia, right? We've been talking about that for literally 20 years. That we don't get any other professional socialization that is not like the tenure track. It's, it's mostly concentrated there. So if you are going to kind of step outside of that trajectory, you've got to seek it out yourself. You kind of got to figure it out, or find, other colleagues and coworkers and friends who are doing that kind of work. But, Kendra asked, when do you know it's time? For me, that question really resonates, because I've recently gone through a transition where my professional identity as a full-time professor, I made a change. Now I consider myself, a full-time equity consultant. I also do some digital storytelling, right? Which we'll talk about that on another episode, right? But I'm in the process of building my own business, which many would call us a side hustle right now, because it is not a main source of income. So again, it comes back to this, because we have more of our income tied to one job, we tend to think of that as the main job, and then all others as side hustles or passion projects. But for me, I knew it was time when I felt like I was going to grow more professionally and financially. I don't think it's shameful to talk about that, especially women, to talk about, knowing your worth and knowing that you want to do work that you're going to be compensated well for, and not bleeding for the cause, those days are over where we need to bleed for the cause. So I knew, just to get back to that, when I felt like I would have been stifled and held back if I had stayed in that one role. other than transitioning into a new role, which is giving me creativity and innovation and space, like a little
Yeah.
bit of space to kind of grow and think about work in new ways and think about the relationship of work in my life in
Yeah.
all. So yeah, Kendra.
Yeah. So let me just say where the sexism and the racism comes in to this conversation, because of course it's always there, right? There is a very legitimate reason why, academics, people with higher degrees, even if you don't have a higher degree, that they don't incentivize or monetize their career. And that is fear of surveillance and retaliation from their primary employer. That is a very real fear. It has been acted out. But one thing that I have come across from my own experience, and then really understanding how this works across different industries for different people. So there are many people that I know who actually do have side jobs, if you will. They do consultancies, they hire themselves out, to do consulting work and different things, so people can tap into, the brain and the intellectual work that they have. But, they don't let their employer know, because they don't want their employer to know that they're making money outside of the institution in which they get their primary check. Now, what's so interesting about this, for instance, I'm in sociology, and there are not a lot of sociologists who have a public platform, if you will, like Dr. Rayshawn Ray from the Brookings Institute, right? Who I would assume very much so, is getting compensation for when he shows up to spaces to do the public sociology that he does. I'm assuming, I don't know, I'm assuming that he is, right? We know Cornel West, for example. He's not a sociologist necessarily, but a theologian. Bettina Love. It's plenty of people out there who are academics who are literally on a tour, a speaking tour, promoting books, getting paid thousands of dollars for minutes of talking. And so, it's not that it is unheard of in the academy or in other industries, right? But let me go back to my point about being a sociologist. So being a sociologist is not, a normative thing to get compensation outside the academy. Some people don't even charge for when they get, invited to do talks at different institutions. Other people do. That's another inequality that happens, right? So what I realized in my own career was that when I became affiliated with a academic program called organizational science, which is dominated by white men, like many, but white men in business in particular, what I realized is that the institution actually feeds resources into their private businesses, right? And so the institution actually provides graduate students to work with their professors in their private jobs, in their private consultations. That is 100% outside of the academy, right? And so there is a contract.
Kind of mind-blowing.
There is a legal contract, and if not just a social contract, in which these white men, predominantly white men, are using their traditional job to feed into their private job or side hustle, if you want to call it that. Whereas women and other people of color are literally hiding their side jobs and their other employment opportunities from the institution in fear of retaliation. Okay, now this is just an anecdotal example, but I'm sure you can find this across not just the academy, not just at the one university that I'm thinking about, but across all industries, right? That there are networking, there are resources and networks put in place to support, especially white men in private business, that are unknown to women and people of color, that they can tap into those same resources. Even to the point that women and people of color think that if they try to get compensation outside of the institution, that it will come at a price of retaliation or losing their job.
Yeah.
And that is a gross, I mean, that is a gross inequality that I've become aware of in my own personal career, my own personal journey, and just understanding how this works across different workplaces as well.
You know, I mean, I just think about The Invisible Hand by Deirdre Royster, and talk about like a whole other kind of invisible hand, right? Who was looking at, you know, the sort of difference between working class white men and men of color, and the invisible hands that white men have access to because of their white privilege and things like that. And I mean, that is an invisible hand. And what a way, you know, the idea of culture of fear and shrinking yourself and feeling like you have to protect it, and you can't, which means you can't promote it, and you have to hide it. Having to hide the work is, you know, I mean, that does it right there, versus actually getting funding and having funds pumped through your, you know, main job for that. It's like, you know, not surprising, but still kind of mind blowing. But not surprising.
I had, you know, I've had a handful of people who took our starting your own business workshop. And, you know, they, of course, work full-time jobs and were thinking about or had started a small, you know, their own small business. And when I asked them, like, how do you promote your business? What social media channels do you use? What marketing are you thinking about? They was like, oh, I don't put anything on social media because my coworkers are on my social media. I don't want them to know what I'm doing. And I said, okay, well, how are you going to make money?
Yeah.
Like, how are you literally going to have a small business? So I just heard a phrase from Regina Du Bois, who's been in business for over 30 years. And she said, if your business doesn't make money, you don't have a business.
Yeah.
And I think that's so true, you know, not to minimize people who are struggling, of course, but if you have a business model that is literally not designed to bring in income, you don't have business, you have a hobby. You're doing the service for free, or, you know, you're extending your energy and your thought and your time and not getting a return, which is not the reason, or, you know, one of the main reasons to have a small business. You have to support yourself. You have to support your business financially so that you can have the resources to increase your own personal well-being. And your well-being is not just your income. It's very important, but it's not just your income. It's also, can you afford healthcare, right? Can you spend time with your children? Can you spend time with your family? Can you spend time with yourself? Those are the things that you want to contribute into your well-being that you can only get if your job provides the resources through income to do it. Yeah. And so hiding your business or hiding your ideas because you have coworkers out there is not the way that you're going to grow your business.
No, but the fear is real. So it's understandable how people feel that way. You know, the other thing too, hearing you talk through all that and just witnessing the way that you've built up a business and how successful you have been, Kendra, as a business owner. So, you know, quickly, you know, is one of the things that I've seen and I've learned from you as I start my own, you know, business, is that the business isn't just the work and income and revenue and profits. You have a relationship with the business itself and all the pieces of the business, right?
Yeah.
So I think for people who might just consider something a side hustle, until you start thinking of it as a relationship, I mean, you probably, I don't know how you feel, but I would imagine you have your loved ones, your family, and you have your, you know, career, and you now a business owner. That must be an important part of the way you relate to it in terms of all of the responsibility that comes with it. So, you know, for people who are on the sort of brink of not knowing if they want their side hustle to become their career, I think that, you know, you have to be willing to make that step and want a relationship with the business and to build it. Like you said, how can you grow it? How can you nurture and feed it and sustain it and see it thrive if you're afraid, if you're not, be like, don't tell anyone that I have a business.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of counterproductive.
It is. And so that's why I think these conversations are really good. And it goes back, like, you know, Chris says, to fear. And, you know, the opposite of fear is trust. And so what it may mean is that you may need to find a person, a small group, a network, what do you call those? A meeting group
Yeah.
of people who you can trust. They have, meetups that have a lot of different categories to them. There's a lot about small business on there as well. But, maybe that means you just find some outlets outside of, the lane in which your coworkers or your boss may ride, and you find a new lane and with new friends that you can like share these ideas and you can trust that is going to be in a space that does not crowd, the space that you don't want to share with your primary job. But you have to put the time in to really talk these ideas out so that you can build into yourself, so that, if you want to call it a side hustle, if you want to call it a side job, if you want to call it a passion project, that those things can come to fruition for yourself. And then once those things get some legs under them, right, then you can start to question or build around how can you make this thing that really fulfills you, that really represents who you are and the work that you want to do and the way that you want to contribute to the world. How can you transition that into something that is more life sustaining, as in bringing in income, as in bringing in healthcare, as in increasing your well-being? For many people, there's the decision to stay where you are. Like right now, I have Work for Change as my small business. I'm still gainfully employed in my typical 9 to 5, and I'm really happy in that space right now. Who knows what'll happen 3 years from now or 5 years from now? Who knows in general? We just went through COVID, right? We know that, life is unpredictable, and so I just think I'm just really grateful to have had the opportunity to really think about and invest in myself so that I can invest in this business. Chris has been with me 100%, in the creation and execution, of the business, and have watched it grow over the short period of time that we have been operating. And not only that, Chris, by example, and others have, trusted us with helping them on their journey to start their own business as well, to contribute to that well-being. And we're really, really grateful that people trusted us to be a part of that process for them. All right. And so we'll return to this topic in some future podcasts. We'll try to have a different angle on it, of course, but we really just always want to, hit them with those sociological questions. As Chris said, as sociologists, we're going to ask big questions. We're going to push you to think. We want you to wrestle with yourself so that you can better yourself, right? And so what we want to encourage you to do is to look up Work for Change. It's work, the number 4, changellc.com. That is the workplace equity consultancy that supports this podcast. You can find us on all the podcast streaming channels, as well as YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Linktree. All of those sites are below. If you're on YouTube, again, you may not be able to see my t-shirt, but I really encourage you to look up the Sociologist Raid collection. My shirt says racial equity broker. It's a cool little shirt that I really want to promote and support his business as well. And again, if you go to our YouTube, you can also find the article that was in the American Sociological Association footnotes on why sociologists should become DEI consultants. But until then, until we see you again, please like, subscribe, and share so that we can work to make the world of work better. Have a great day, everyone.